Today we're going to talk about some incredible varieties of squash that can last up to 2 years, 1 to 2 years, just some of them sitting on the kitchen counter. And this is something that can help take care of your family during difficult times financially. Growing it in your garden and leaving it in your house, you'll be able to feed your family during times of financial difficulty or other hardships. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. Some of the benefits of squash. Squash are an amazing plant. They are beneficial when it comes to lowering your cholesterol. One of the great things about squash is that you get multiple different foods out of one plant. What do you mean? Well, you get the actual squash itself. So you get the meat of the squash, so you get that. But then you get another high protein seed that you have within there. So you have the edible seeds. And third, but this one's more during the summer, you can eat the flowers. Now, you only want to eat the flowers really for the ones after you've actually used them to pollinate the other ones. Then you can use those flowers, but you don't want to get rid of the flowers that are going to give you this right here. So you don't want to miss out on your squash, but you can also eat the flowers. One of the things you may have noticed that often when you buy squash in the store, they're just not that good. Honestly, it's something that I found that very seldom do I have a really good, wow, that squash is good. It's like, it's edible, you can eat it, but who'd really want to? But when you grow some some of these wonderful heirloom varieties that have been around for over 100 years, you can find some that have fantastic flavor. And so we're not just looking at ones that have long storage, but we're also looking to find ones that taste very good. So I want to talk to you about the Sibley squash. This is a very special squash that originally came on the market in 1887. It was by a man who had that name, Sibley, and this is something that came from the Missouri watershed area, potentially very similar to what the Winnebago Native Americans used. Then it made it over to Rochester, New York area where it began to be sold. Once again, there is a company there today that is selling them. One of the fascinating things about this is not one of the longest of the storing ones. This one may store around a year, and you're gonna find that you'll probably be able to have these and harvest them, and then the next year when you're harvesting the next ones or getting close to harvesting it, you still should be able to have some of these around. The Sibley winter squash, which is a maxima, by the way. And this particular squash can have flavor like it was cooked with coconut oil. What an amazing thing. Obviously, coconut has a wonderful flavor, but to have one that you don't have to actually add anything to it, can have a nice dry consistency to the flesh and something with wonderful flavor. Now, one key to remember about the Sibley squash is that in general, you want to wait until about January to start really eating it, or at least it's going to taste best by the time January rolls around. So right when it's harvested, it's not going to taste as good as it would if you'll give it some time to actually cure. By the way, I also do have a video on how to grow squash, how to pollinate squash, and how to cure it, because you want to cure it before you eat it in general. This next variety here actually hails from Australia. Beautiful country. I've had the opportunity to go there. This particular variety is known as Jarrahdale, and it generally is going to grow maybe 10 to 12 pounds, but you may get, if you got real good soil, some up to 20 or even 30 pounds. And what's interesting about it is they have a small, at least from my growing, a small seed cavity and a lot of thick flesh. So there's a ton of meat on this one. That's one of the nice things about it. And in general, these are going to store for well over 12 months, well over a year. So you should be able to have year-round squash with the Jarrahdale. Another nice thing about the Jarrahdale pumpkin is that it can be fantastic for things like pies. So if you're looking for a pie pumpkin, you're going to get plenty of pie out of this plant. Another great benefit to this is that it is also very tasty, very sweet, something that is not stringy. So this is another all-around great way to go, but I would suggest if you do grow this, you probably want to grow it in an area that has a nice, long, warm season. By me, we're up near the 45th parallel, and it seemed, at least maybe it was just the year I did it, it didn't seem to be able to make it all the way. We did harvest some, but they did not have the standard long storage life. So grow this in an area that has plenty long summer, and you should have well over a year's worth of food off of this particular plant. Now, this next variety I think is one of the coolest varieties out there. Another Native American variety called the Hopi Pale Gray Squash from the Hopi Native Americans. And this is kind of like the granddaddy of storage. This one is, I would say, almost legendary for its storability. And Hopi Pale Gray Squash can last over 2 years just sitting around in a house, like on a kitchen table or something like that. Now, sometimes if you put it in cold storage, it actually is worse. These seem to do well at kind of standard room temperature, just sitting around the house, sitting on the kitchen table, sitting on some kind of, not in front of a wood stove or something like that, but just sitting out in the house. These things have this, it's hard to believe how long they can store. The other benefit to Hopi Pale Gray is that it has if you like sweet squash, this can be a very sweet squash. It doesn't have the thick flesh like you'll have on the Jarradale variety. Instead, this one has, I don't know, maybe an inch of flesh on it. So it's not super, super thick, but it is a fantastic variety to grow. This is something that was almost lost. There was one seed company that was carrying it a number of years back, and it burned down. It burned down, and that's the thing. If people don't store their seeds, and we don't learn to store our seeds, one fire, and you hear all these food processing plants that are just burning to the ground. One company, imagine seed companies could burn down, and there goes the stock of seed, and it's gone forever if somebody doesn't store it. That's why it's so important for us to store the seeds. And there's a woman by the name of Jackie Clay and her husband, and they have a seed company. They live up in northern Minnesota, way up in the north of Minnesota. They grow these themselves, and so this is a fantastic variety to grow. Super long storage. It's a heritage variety, an heirloom going back to the Native Americans. And it makes you wonder, yes, some of the ones that we get at the store are good, but some of these ones that just store forever, using hyperbole anyway, you wonder why weren't these more popular? There's always the common varieties that are out there, and some of these other ones, they actually, in my estimation, they taste better, have better storability. I don't know, they just didn't get popular because they didn't get popular, but you can use them. And one of the great things about it is even after storing for a year, it's not going to become mushy and kind of rotten like your average variety will, but it's still going to be holding fresh well after a year, upwards of even over 2 years. One other variety that I have particularly grown is the Seminole pumpkin. Now, the Seminole pumpkin, with its name, there were the Seminole Native Americans, and the Seminole pumpkin is a variety that is from deep south, Florida way, and this is a variety that has very long vines. So this is a real vining variety. And this is something that does take a longer season. Now, I live close to the 45th parallel, and I was able to grow this, and it did store for over a year for me. And so that's fantastic. So I think this one, the Seminole pumpkin, may get you from 1 to 2 years. Obviously, the later you get, the less likely it's still going to be good at that point, but making it over a year for the Seminole pumpkin is a great variety. Now, one of the other benefits to this is that the Seminole is a variety that is from the species Machata, whereas something like the Jarradale is going to be a Maxima, or some of our other varieties are Maxima. You can grow them both in the same area, and they shouldn't be cross-pollinating. So you'll be able to save your seeds without them cross-pollinating. So if you're doing the Jarradale or you're doing the Sibley, these are both Maxima, and being that they're both Maxima, if you grow them in the same place at the same time, they're going to cross-pollinate, and you don't know what your next variety is going to be. It's going to be a little bit different. That season, it's going to look just like this. It'll look just like the variety you planted, but the next year, because of the cross-pollination, it'll be like a man and a woman coming together. You don't know exactly what their child is going to be like. Typically, it's going to be a mixture of both of them, And I mean, genetically it is, obviously. And the same thing that will happen with these plants. Probably if you did that, you're going to get a long storage variety, but you never know for sure. But if you're doing a machata, like the Seminole pumpkin, it's a different species, and so they generally are not going to be cross-pollinating, so you can be growing 2 of these long storage varieties at the same time. And so at least you can do 2 different varieties that we have here. The other option, one cool thing you can do is you can grow all of them at the same time, find out what you like the best, but then you can't use the seeds, because if you grew them all next to each other, you're going to be having some of that cross-pollination, and they're going to be changed the next year. These are some great varieties that you could find to be a benefit on your property, having food year-round. Times are getting tougher and tougher. We see it in the world. The future of this world is not always so hopeful, but we can have hope, and one of the great ways that we have hope is there is hope in the soil when we're growing our own food. Hey, by the way, if you haven't seen our video on 11 foods to grow in difficult times, you're not going to want. This is an extremely important and instructive video. Check that out right here. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notifications, share it with a friend. God bless and have a fantastic day.